Jamal Harris, a 13-year-old student, was handcuffed in front of his entire class for a crime he didn't commit, facing public humiliation and fear. Officer Ryan Caldwell, confident and dismissive, seemed determined to enforce authority without concern for truth or fairness. Everything changed the moment Principal Angela Harris, Jamal's mother, entered the room, confronting Caldwell with calm but unwavering power. But just listen to how shocking the turn of events in this drama was, and why justice ultimately prevailed. It started as an ordinary Tuesday at Lincoln Middle School. The morning sunlight streamed through the wide classroom windows, casting warm rectangles of light across rows of desks. Mr. Stevens' eighth-grade class hummed with the quiet energy of students settling in after homeroom. Some were finishing their math homework, others whispered about the upcoming science project, and Jamal Harris sat near the back, carefully organizing his notebook. The day felt typical, uneventful, until the door suddenly burst open. Officer Ryan Caldwell entered, his uniform crisp, badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and a stern expression that demanded attention. The classroom went silent immediately. All eyes turned to him, their curiosity tinged with unease. Caldwell's boots clicked against the linoleum floor as he approached the center of the room, a clipboard in one hand and a sense of authority in every step. He didn't greet the students, didn't ask a question. He scanned the room like a predator seeking prey. Then his gaze fell on Jamal. The 13-year-old boy looked up just in time to meet those cold, calculating eyes. In that moment, Caldwell's entire demeanor shifted. Suspicion hardened into accusation. Without a single word of warning or inquiry, he pointed at Jamal and barked, "You cheated on the test!" A collective gasp rippled through the classroom. Some students exchanged shocked glances. Others froze with wide eyes, unsure how to react. Jamal's chest tightened and his hands trembled slightly as he shook his head in disbelief. I didn't do anything," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, cracking under the weight of fear and confusion. Caldwell ignored him. He produced a pair of handcuffs with a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness, and clasped them around Jamal's wrists. The metallic click echoed across the classroom, magnifying the tension. The sound seemed to reverberate in the students' chests, a chilling punctuation to an already surreal scene. Some mouths opened as if to speak, but no words came out. Jamal felt the steel against his skin and the sting of injustice settling deep in his stomach. The humiliation was immediate and consuming, a visceral punch that left him stunned. Mr. Stevens stepped forward, his voice firm but cautious. "Officer, maybe we should—" Caldwell cut him off with a sharp shake of his head, his lips pressed into a tight line. "This is a matter of discipline. Step aside." The teacher froze. Other students fidgeted in their seats, glancing at each other with expressions of disbelief and anger. The room vibrated with a quiet, simmering tension, a mixture of shock and growing indignation. Jamal's classmates felt the unfairness keenly. Some clenched their fists under their desks, others gritted their teeth, but fear kept them silent. Jamal's own emotions were harder to contain. His face burned red, a combination of shame, anger, and confusion. How could this be happening? Why him? Why here, in the place that was supposed to be safe, surrounded by people who were supposed to guide and protect him? Every instinct told him this was wrong, yet he felt powerless. The officer's unyielding stare, the handcuffs biting into his wrists, the frozen classroom, it all pressed down on him like a heavy, inescapable weight. Anger began to rise too, not just in Jamal, but in the subtle shifts of the classroom, the whispered murmurs, the tightening of jaws, the indignation simmering beneath polite faces. But Jamal's anger was mixed with a sharper, deeper emotion: humiliation. This wasn't just a reprimand. This wasn't a mistake. This was an injustice laid bare in front of everyone he knew, a cruel act that challenged his dignity, his sense of safety, and his right to simply exist as himself in a place of learning. The unfairness of it all clung to the room like a thick fog, visible in the rigid postures of students, in the tightening grip of Jamal's hands, and in the cold, unwavering stance of Officer Caldwell. In that moment, nothing else mattered: the lesson plan, the test, the day's normal rhythms. All of it was eclipsed by the raw, undeniable sting of injustice. And as Jamal looked around at his classmates, some sympathetic, some stunned, he realized that the world outside his own understanding had just intruded into his classroom in the most humiliating way imaginable. The anger in the room was palpable, silent, yet roaring, and for Jamal, it was only the beginning. Jamal sat rigidly in the metal chair, the cold surface pressing against his legs, the handcuffs biting into his wrists with each slight movement. The physical discomfort was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the emotional ache gnawing at him from the inside. Every thrum of his heart seemed louder in the tense silence of the classroom, each beat a reminder of how exposed he felt, how powerless. The teacher, Mr. Stevens, tried to step forward again, his hands raised in protest, voice firm but careful. "Officer Caldwell, please, this isn't necessary. Jamal hasn't done anything wrong." Caldwell's smirk widened, a slight curl of satisfaction that made the air in the room feel heavier. His eyes never left Jamal, unyielding, cold, and unwavering, as if the boy's confusion and fear were nothing more than an inconvenience to his authority. "Step back," he said curtly, his tone dismissive. "This is how we handle situations like this." The room seemed to shrink around Jamal. He felt the weight of all those eyes on him, the whispers of his classmates, the subtle shifting in their seats, the tense silence from the teacher. Each glance, each breath, each tiny motion around him seemed magnified, a spotlight on the humiliation that had been forced upon him. He wanted to cry out, to protest, to make someone understand that he was innocent, but the handcuffs made even the simplest movement a challenge, and the officer's imposing presence made words feel fragile, almost meaningless. Pain settled over him, not just the stinging of the metal cuffs, not just the pressure on his wrists, but a deeper, sharper pain, the kind that pierces the chest and twists the gut, the kind that comes from feeling unfairly judged, singled out, and labeled in a world that refuses to see the person behind the skin. Jamal's mind kept returning to the same haunting question: why me? He remembered the morning, how he had walked into class with a sense of calm, organized and ready, carrying the weight of his homework and his projects. And now here he was, treated as though he were guilty of something terrible, a visible symbol of something he had not done. Pain, he realized, could be more than physical. It could live in the way the world looked at you, in the way someone's gaze reduced you to a single assumption. His friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus, sitting across the aisle, fidgeted with his pencil, casting furtive glances at Jamal. Lila, who always sat beside him, clasped her hands tightly in her lap, as though trying to contain her own distress so she wouldn't draw Caldwell's attention. They wanted to help, to intervene, to say something, but they were small in comparison to the imposing figure in the front of the room. The authority in the uniform overshadowed their support, making them powerless in a way that left Jamal feeling even more alone. Every second under Caldwell's cold gaze seemed to stretch endlessly. Jamal could feel the judgment in the silence, the assumption that he had done something wrong without question, without proof. He swallowed hard, trying to steady the lump in his throat, trying to focus on anything but the rising shame and fear that threatened to overwhelm him. The whispers of his classmates became a blur, a soft chorus of confusion and sympathy that couldn't bridge the divide between him and the officer's unyielding authority. The pain of being publicly humiliated, of being forced into a position where innocence was irrelevant, seeped into every fiber of Jamal's body. His chest tightened, his stomach knotted, and his hands itched from the metal restraints. But worse than any of that was the knowledge that the world could be so unreasonably harsh that a single misjudgment, or worse, a single bias, could strip away dignity in an instant. In that metal chair, under the harsh lights of the classroom, Jamal felt small. He felt the weight of injustice pressing down, crushing in a way that was almost suffocating. Yet even in the midst of this pain, a quiet spark of resilience lingered, a faint awareness that this moment, as unbearable as it was, could not define him. Still, for now, the pain dominated, unrelenting, an invisible mark etched across his young spirit. The quiet tension of the classroom was broken by a soft, deliberate creak, the door shifting on its hinges. Heads turned instinctively, the sudden sound cutting through the oppressive silence like a spark. Jamal's stomach lurched, a mixture of anxiety and fleeting curiosity swirling inside him. And then she appeared. Principal Angela Harris, poised and composed, her presence commanding attention without a single word. But the moment her eyes landed on her son, handcuffed and trembling under Officer Caldwell's unyielding gaze, her entire expression froze for just a heartbeat. Time seemed to stretch. Jamal's chest tightened as he caught her gaze, recognition lighting up his fear-worn face. Relief, like the first drops of rain after a long drought, began to trickle in. His mother's face was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and controlled determination. There was no panic in her, no frantic energy, only a calm, unshakable force that seemed to ripple through the room. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jamal sensed that he was not alone. Caldwell's stance wavered almost imperceptibly, and Jamal noticed it immediately. The officer had entered the classroom with the weight of authority, certain of his control, but now he faltered. Angela's presence was different. He hadn't expected it, and he had certainly not anticipated the clarity and intensity of her gaze. Something in the air shifted, subtle yet undeniable, as if the room itself had taken a collective breath in anticipation. Angela's voice, calm but precise, sliced through the tension like a blade. "Unhand my son, Officer Caldwell." Now, there was no hesitation, no wavering, just the absolute certainty of a person who knew both her rights and her power. The words, simple yet commanding, echoed across the room. Jamal felt them wash over him, the tightness in his chest loosening, a spark of hope igniting in the deepest corners of his heart. Hope, however, was more than just the relief of seeing his mother. It was the recognition that the situation could change, that someone with authority and experience in justice and fairness had arrived, ready to intervene. Angela had spent years advocating for students, navigating bureaucracy, and ensuring that fairness was not just an ideal, but a practice. She was relentless, unshakable, and unwavering, a woman who had faced challenges far beyond the walls of this school. Jamal's pulse quickened as he realized that the humiliation he had endured, the injustice that had gripped him, was about to be confronted head-on. The classroom seemed to freeze in place. Students leaned forward in their seats, their curiosity blending with a cautious optimism. Even Mr. Stevens, who had already tried to intervene, straightened slightly, hope flickering in his eyes. There was a collective sense that something fundamental was about to shift, a change in the balance of power that had seemed so absolute just moments ago. Jamal's mind raced as he watched his mother approach, each step measured, deliberate, radiating authority. His fear, though still present, was now tinged with anticipation. Could it really be this simple? Could her arrival undo the injustice he had been forced to endure? The thought alone made his heart swell, a warmth replacing some of the cold sting from the handcuffs. Caldwell's confident posture wavered further. He had underestimated Angela Harris, underestimated her knowledge of school policy, her insistence on fairness, and her readiness to protect her child. The balance of power, once so firmly in his hands, now felt precarious, uncertain. And in that moment, Jamal realized that he was witnessing not just the potential reversal of his own misfortune, but a demonstration of courage and resolve in its purest form. As Angela stopped beside him, placing a gentle but steady hand on his shoulder, Jamal's hope solidified. He was not powerless. He was not alone. The handcuffs, the stares, the whispers, all of it now seemed surmountable because someone who would not compromise had arrived. And that realization, more than anything else, began to dissolve the fear that had held him captive since Officer Caldwell's first accusation. Hope had returned to Jamal's chest, strong and unyielding, as the classroom waited, silent but tense, for what would happen next. Angela Harris stepped forward with deliberate confidence, every movement precise, measured, and imbued with authority. Her hand rested lightly on her badge, a symbol of her role and her experience, yet her eyes, steady and unwavering, carried the weight of both a mother's protection and a leader's resolve. Officer Caldwell, who had moments ago stood tall and imposing, suddenly seemed smaller under her gaze. The smirk that had so arrogantly adorned his face had vanished, replaced by a subtle tension that betrayed his uncertainty. "Officer Caldwell," Angela said, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the room's thick air. "You will remove these handcuffs immediately." There was no hesitation, no room for argument, just a quiet command that demanded compliance. Jamal's chest tightened, his pulse quickening as he felt the possibility of relief stir inside him. The metallic click of the handcuffs being released resonated in the still room, a sound that symbolized more than freedom from physical restraint. It was the sound of dignity restored, of injustice being challenged head-on. Jamal rubbed his wrists gently, the sting fading, replaced by a growing sense of awe and relief. But the triumph did not stop with his freedom. Angela immediately moved to ensure that the incident was fully documented, her pen capturing every detail, every wrongful accusation, every misstep of authority that had led to this moment. Her actions signaled that Caldwell would face consequences, a suspension pending investigation, marking a formal acknowledgment that such behavior would not be tolerated. The classroom, once heavy with fear and tension, began to shift. Murmurs of approval and disbelief spread among the students as they processed what had just occurred. They weren't just witnessing a boy being freed. They were seeing accountability in action, a clear demonstration that standing by injustice was no longer acceptable. Jamal's classmates erupted into applause, hesitant at first, then more robust as the significance of the moment sank in. Their clapping was not just for Jamal, though he was the center of the event. It was for the lesson embedded in the confrontation. They had learned, viscerally, that injustice can be confronted, that authority is not infallible, and that courage often comes in the form of those who refuse to remain silent. Students exchanged glances, their eyes wide, with the realization that the classroom, a microcosm of the larger world, could be a place where fairness and morality were actively defended. Jamal, still catching his breath, turned to his mother and wrapped his arms around her in a long, tight hug. Relief, gratitude, and newfound confidence surged through him. But beyond the immediate comfort of the embrace, a spark ignited inside him, a quiet, steady belief that fairness, even against the odds, could prevail. He had been humiliated, judged unfairly, and placed under the shadow of authority that had abused its power. Yet he had emerged on the other side with his dignity intact. Angela pulled back slightly, looking into Jamal's eyes. "Remember this moment, Jamal," she said softly, her tone carrying both reassurance and encouragement. "Never forget that standing up for what is right is always worth it." Jamal nodded, feeling the truth in her words resonate deep inside him. The incident, though painful, had become a defining lesson, a living example of justice restored and courage rewarded. The classroom, once heavy with fear and tension, now shimmered with inspiration. Students whispered among themselves, a quiet energy of reflection and hope spreading through the room. The lesson was tangible. Dignity, respect, and fairness are not abstract ideals. They are actions that can be fought for and defended even when the odds seem insurmountable. As Jamal gathered his belongings and returned to his seat, he held his head higher than before. The day had begun with humiliation and injustice, but it ended with triumph and inspiration. The story of that moment, the confrontation, the courage, the accountability, would linger in the minds of every student, a powerful reminder that fairness and justice are worth fighting for, and that even in the face of fear, the right action can change everything. The room exhaled collectively, a sense of closure washing over them all, leaving a lasting impression. When courage meets justice, hope is never lost.